Could we see a significant deadline deal between the New York Rangers and the Montreal Canadiens? Plus, it's possible that the Rangers may be making multiple trades ahead of the deadline. We're going to take a look at a variety of trade targets they're rumored to be interested in talking about. Plus, we also have some updates on the Edmonton Oilers and Claude Giroux's destination before the deadline as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL trade rumors to take a look at here today. First up, I want to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. Now, of course, it's been rumored for a long time they were going to be expected to make a change or upgrade in goal between the pipes, but it doesn't look like that's likely going to happen. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but it does look like it's going to be hard to do. Really, the only goalie I think on the market that would be a substantial upgrade would be Marc-Andre Fleury, and right now the indications are pointing to the fact that he might want to finish out the season in Chicago and might prefer just to have a shortened season, have his offseason start early, and kind of decide what comes next for him in his career beyond that. So obviously, if he's not available or doesn't want to go to Edmonton, there's not a lot of options out there, in my opinion, that's really going to get a substantial improvement with the price tag you'd have to pay for it. The Oilers are likely in a scenario as well because of their cap situation that they're kind of going to be in like a dollar in, dollar out type of trade, and that's going to be difficult to achieve. I mean, I can see them trying their best to add some depth, maybe trying to shed some salary if they can, but again, it's not going to be easy. I know one player, it's rumored that they would like to be able to move along, would be Josh Archibald. Of course, he's been out for a long stretch with a COVID-related heart issue, but I believe he's ready to come back. I mean, he's also unvaccinated, so playing in Canada is pretty difficult. It'd be a lot easier for him to play in the U.S. Because of the difference in restrictions amongst the NHL and the different local municipalities. But even then, is there going to be interest? I mean, he's making $1.5 million. They could bury most of his salary in the minors, but every little bit would be helpful to be able to make other moves. I mean, even look to a guy like Zach Kassian is probably another guy who is out for a long stretch, and they kind of shown that they don't really need, in my opinion. But at the same time, who's going to take on that contract? He still has a decent amount of term on it. Not going to be an easy scenario. So I know Ken Hall and the Oilers do want to make some upgrades, but it's not going to be an easy task. They're going to have to move money out to bring money in, and the contracts they're going to prefer to move are not going to be desirable to many other teams. So it's going to be a challenging situation going to the deadline for sure. Now, when it comes to Claude Giroux, we've heard some recent rumors about Tampa being interested in Giroux, which I found not overly shocking, but almost impossible to make it happen. I mean, Tampa, the two-time defending Stanley Cup champions, are going to be looking for a three-peat, something we haven't seen in the NHL since the Islanders in the early 80s. So not going to be an easy task, but I think Tampa will certainly be in the running. They're having a strong regular season. They have one of the best goalies in the world, which is always a major piece to the puzzle. They got a really strong D-core, lots of great forwards. They're going to be a handful for anybody to get out in the playoffs. So could they win a third cup? Absolutely. Would they adding a guy like Giroux really increase those chances? Yes, absolutely would. But he comes with a big ticket on his contract, and Tampa would have a lot of challenges that way. It would almost be guaranteed that it would have to be a third team involved as a broker, eating up some cap space, which I know there are teams out there who are willing to do that. But at the same time, it's going to be a fairly steep asking price for Tampa, not only to acquire Giroux, but end up paying a second team to take on some of the money as well. So as much as it's a fun thought, and Tampa would be really loading up for a third run, I just see it being pretty unlikely. I think they will try to add some extra depth, but I'm not sure that they're going to do anything too substantial. The main team that remains to be linked to Claude Giroux is the Avalanche. I mean, if you look at it, it's they have a lot of pieces there that the Flyers would be interested in for sure. Now, like as I mentioned before, and I continue to hear this from a variety of sources, that Giroux's not likely going anywhere until he plays in game number 1,000 with the Philadelphia Flyers, which is only a few days, I think it's 3 or 4 days before the deadline is what that's currently on pace for. Unless he has to miss time, which is hopefully not going to happen. Hopefully he stays healthy and there's no issues in that regard. But as far as what pieces would be going to the Flyers, is rumored that maybe a first-round pick, maybe a defenseman like Justin Barron, and maybe a prospect forward like an Oscar Olofsson. Those are kind of the pieces that are rumored to be being discussed. I can't imagine the Avalanche parting with Bo Byer. I know there were some other rumors that came up today about the Avalanche maybe having JT Miller on their radar, as well as Giroux, and that there was some talk about Bo Byram going to Vancouver in a Miller trade. And I can see why Vancouver, absolutely. If the Avalanche come calling Vancouver about Miller, That's the first thing I'm going to ask for if I'm Jim Rutherford as well. Are you willing to include Bo Byram? That's a starting point. If you're not willing to include him, I'm probably not even really entertaining the conversation a whole lot, unless you get really something real substantial off their young forwards, or that are really solid. Like you're giving up McKinnon or Rantanen or Landeskog. No, right? Well, you got to get something substantial. Miller's their best player, very productive, good contract. If you're not throwing in something big like that, then it's really a non-starter. So ultimately, in the case of the Avalanche, I really think it's much more likely here that they do a deal for a guy like Giroux, and they mainly give futures as the asking price, which to me makes a ton more sense. Now, as I mentioned, could we see a substantial trade between the Rangers and the Montreal Canadiens? I think it's quite a possibility. I know there's the latest reports here from some of the Rangers media and Rangers bloggers indicating that there's a variety of Ranger targets that are being discussed, and one of the big ones is defenseman Ben Chiarot in Montreal. So obviously, you look at Chiarot on the Canadiens with Jeff Gorton as the head there, along with, of course, Kent Hughes. Of course, Gorton, former Ranger boss, so he knows the Rangers prospect pool extremely well, was involved in drafting majority of the players that are there right now that are going to likely be discussed. So he has the inside scoop on them and knows lots about them. Obviously knows Chris Drury quite well as well. So certainly I think there's a lot of moving parts there that make it likely that we'll see a deal like that. Now, Chiarot would be, your physical third pair defenseman who could certainly chip in on offense. Now, in Montreal, a lot of the time he's played up higher in the lineup, but on a real solid cup contending team, he may have to drop down to be a third pair guy. But ultimately, if he is your third pair defenseman on the left side, to me, you're doing pretty good. I mean, I know a guy like Patrick Nemeth right now is getting some playing time with the Rangers. They have obviously a youngster like Braden Schneider's more on the right side playing a lot, getting his feet wet in the NHL, and you get Zach Jones, you get Nils Lundqvist, but it's rumored that the Rangers likely want to do multiple deals here ahead of the deadline. They likely want to add on the blue line and at least one forward. Now, the one thing about the Rangers, they have a lot of prospects and they have a lot of cap space. They have more flexibility than a lot of the other contending teams here. The New York Rangers have a pretty substantial amount they can add at the deadline. So that really leaves things wide open. So you look at Chiarot, maybe for a guy like Vitaly Kravtsov. Kravtsov's a guy that got upset this year after not cracking the lineup, went back to Russia, and you have to think that based on what he had to say, it sounded like the previous regime of Davidson and Gorton, I don't know if they made him some promises. I mean, that might be too strong of a word, but it sounded like he had the impression from them that he was going to be like a top 6, top 9 regular forward. And after getting cut out of training camp and being sent to the minors, it's something he was quite upset about. So he's been playing over in Russia, certainly waiting for a trade. Obviously, with everything going on between Russia and Ukraine right now, there's obviously some different feelings out there on Russian athletes. So I don't know if that'll impact anything in this regard or not. But I think it's fair to say that considering when Kravtsov was drafted and Gorton being at the helm of hockey ops and being the GM of the New York Rangers, they, kind of went off the board a little bit, in my opinion, to draft this player. So obviously it's somebody that he's quite high on. So it makes a lot of sense he would want a player like him included. There's always, Nils Lundqvist is another player, along with maybe Zach Jones. As far as the prospect pool goes, I think are potential players that they could consider trading, as well as, of course, the first round pick in the 2022 NHL draft. Now, I'm not saying that Chiarot's going to command all of those pieces, but I'm saying those are the main pieces that the Rangers, I think, will be willing to part with to bolster their roster here ahead of the deadline. Not necessarily all for Chiarot. Like I said, they might be the first round pick, and one prospect, for example, would likely be what it's going to take on a Chiarot trade. At least that's my opinion. But as I mentioned, there's a variety of other forwards that the Rangers are quite interested in as well. Depending on what they're willing to move, besides that, they might move a little bit off the roster. I wouldn't completely rule out a guy like Filipino being included as well. So they may have a little bit of money going out off the roster or roster spots available if they're able to acquire any of these other guys. Like I mentioned, there's been a lot of chatter about JT Miller making a return to the Big Apple, but I think the asking price from Vancouver is going to be way too high. So I certainly do think that there is legit interest, and there have been on Drury in the Rangers side on this kind of player, but I just don't think they're going to be able to get it done. To me, as much as he would be a big help for them, they know they're going to have a lot of stiff competition in the playoffs, and he would come, highly coveted, but at the same time, huge asking price. And as much as it's their first year kind of getting back into contention, I don't know that they're going to really want to empty out the prospect pool cupboard that much in their draft picks for one player. So even though he's a coveted option, I think another kind of plan B seems to be like a guy like Rickard Rakell with the Anaheim Ducks. Like I mentioned in yesterday's video, Rakell's a guy who's been drawing interest from the Rangers, and certainly a guy who's also pretty versatile. He can play center. You can put him on either wing. He's a proven goal scorer. He has, struggled a little bit more recently, but a fresh start might be exactly what a guy like Rakell needs. He can play with some pretty high-end talent with the Rangers in their top six. You can even put him on the third line if need be. He's a guy who can, help you on the PK as well, and really could be a really versatile option that's not going to come at a huge price. He's a pending unrestricted free agent, so you're not committed long term, and it's a player that kind of makes a lot of sense. Now, another top six player that they've been kind of reportedly interested in is longtime NHL forward Phil Kessel out of Arizona, who's been wanting a trade, and the asking price isn't even overly high. I think the only reason why we haven't seen a deal is I'm not sure that they're completely convinced he's the right guy for the job, for what they're looking to do here. I do think there's a pretty good chance somebody will take a chance on Kessel. His numbers are down this year, but if you look at the body of work throughout his career, he's been very productive, has a couple Stanley Cups to his name, and even though he kind of somewhat has a reputation for being a little bit difficult to work with at times, I think somebody is going to take a chance on him. I'm not entirely convinced he's going to go to the Rangers. I guess he's probably like a plan B or C for Drury. That to me is kind of where things sit. Obviously, like I said, JT Miller, even a guy like Philip Forsberg, who's been mentioned recently in Rangers trade rumors, are certainly intriguing and would come at high cost acquisitions. So as much as Philip Forsberg too kind of makes a lot of sense for the Rangers, I don't know that they're going to be able to do that. At the same time, the way Forsberg's been playing this year, he would also be a tremendous pickup for that top six. It might be a better option than Rickard Rakell, but Rakell's going to come at a cheaper price. So it kind of boils down to those negotiations. Now, earlier in the season, especially as recently as a few weeks ago, it was looking to be a little bit more, not really a shoe-in or guarantee, but a lot more likely that the Predators were going to make the playoffs. So you had to wonder that maybe Forsberg won't go anywhere, because even if they have a difficult time signing him, they could use him as their own rental. Do they want to go into the playoffs after having a season where they exceed expectations and then trade away their most productive player? That might seem silly to some, but listening to David Poyle's remarks and comments lately to the media, I honestly think if Forsberg is not signed come the deadline, regardless of the Predators' standing situation, I really think there's a pretty good chance this guy's going to be traded. I think he looks like he wants to explore free agency. He's going to be wanting to have the highest paid player on the Predators roster, more than Duchesne, more than Johansson, more than Yossi. And in terms of Duchesne and Johansson, I think that could be justified based on how he's played compared to them, but maybe not so much in the terms of Yossi. And I don't know that David Poyle is going to want another 7 or 8 year deal on the books at $9 million. That's a lot of money. Forsberg's still young enough that it's not extremely risky, but you're basically paying a couple of extra years there just for the security for the player and to kind of get your AAV to where it needs to be. But it's going to be a tough one to do. I don't really know what happens with Forsberg. I can certainly understand why he'd be a Ranger target, but again, I'm not sure if we see a guy like Miller or Forsberg go to New York. I think we're looking at more like the Kessels or the Rakell or a Max Domi, who's also reportedly on the Rangers kind of sightlines here at Columbus. That's not really a given that he stays with the Jackets. Of course, he's been kind of bounced around a little bit. Of course, started in Arizona, found himself traded to Montreal for Alex Galchenyuk, where he had a real solid first season. Obviously, production then kind of tailed off a bit, and then, of course, he ended up getting moved along here again and finds himself in Columbus in a system where he's had some success but not really a ton. And I think Domi at this point is kind of trending to more being like a bottom six forward than he is a top six forward. And a team like New York, especially, who would be strong enough and deep enough, that's the only place he'd fit in. But he's not making a ton of money, especially if you can get Columbus to retain a little bit on that kind of contract. To put Max Domi on your third or fourth line to be there for the scrappiness and the physicality and the other things that he's willing to do, might not be terrible for the playoffs. I know they have Ryan Reeves, so obviously Reeves can do a lot of those same things, except he's significantly bigger. And there's even some questions, I think, amongst Rangers fans that when you get to certain games in the playoffs, will Reeves be in the lineup? Obviously for the most part, you want him there as a deterrent, somebody to kind of make sure the other team knows that he's there. So they're not going to mess with any of the star players. But, obviously Domi can do those things too, but he's not nearly as intimidating as Ryan Reeves is. But if they wanted to add some extra grit, it is rumor that he is a guy that's kind of on their radar as well. So, getting in guys like Giroux, Raquel, Domi, certainly a lot more cost efficient than your Forsbergs and your Millers. So hard to say where the Rangers go, but I think that right now they appear to be one of the front leading teams to land Ben Chiarot out of Montreal, and that trade to me makes a ton of sense. It's great for the Rangers to end up physicality on the third pair. It's great for Montreal to get some prospects, especially guys like Jeff Gorton's familiar with. You can maybe get a first round pick out of that, and then these other guys that kind of make sense here as well for the Rangers. But another guy we haven't talked about yet as well is Tomas Hertl out of San Jose. Now, I think this is also a little bit of a pipe dream because he's going to also, if he is moved, get a big return to the Sharks. But there's been a lot of reports that the Sharks and Hertl are interested in an extension. Now, of course, just like Forsberg, there have been conversations. But as we stand, getting, around the 3-week mark now outside of, or less than that, actually, about 2.5 weeks outside of the trade deadline, we're still unsigned when it comes to Hertl's camp. So clearly, if he is available and he can go to be on that second line, to me, he's an even better option than a guy like Raquel or Domi. So we'll have to see how that goes, but another player to watch as well. So let me know your thoughts on all the latest trade rumors down below in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.